Everybody. As we always do, we're going to begin with an act of reverence and the Pledge of Allegiance. I typically look for a young person. Tonight, that's going to be a relative term. Kalia is probably the youngest. It looks like by unanimous consent, Kalia, you are going to be the person to read the, do the Pledge of Allegiance. So come on up. Come on, let's give her a round of encouragement. Trust me, there'll come a time when you will wish you were the youngest person in the room. That's all right. That's all right. That's all right. Well, we're all going to do it together. All right, ready? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much, Kalia. We appreciate that.
You could say the Jamaican.
Yeah, really.
See how she rose to the occasion,
That's
even
right.
though.
All right. You know, actually, Vice President, that's not a bad idea. In America, we are a nation built on different nations. So in the future, you know, if somebody wishes to or is familiar with their nation of origins pledge or wants to read it or recite it, that would go a long way in suggesting to our national leaders that nobody except the Native Americans can own this country, and that we all come from someplace else. Even though Donald Trump may not think he comes from someplace else, he and his people, even his wife's people, come from someplace else. And that's what makes this country great. So if somebody in this room is proud of their heritage or their people or where they came from, and you are, and I know, I'm just looking at this room, I know many people in this room are, and you happen to know your national anthem or you know your pledge, let's talk about it. Call me up, send me an email, because I think that would actually be a very good sign of what this country stands for. So thank you for the idea. I don't know if that's what you were actually intended on, but that's a good idea. All right, acceptance of the minutes. There are no minutes to approve. Next item on the agenda is speakers addressing an other than an agenda item, and we have two. Julio Vicente, I'm mispronouncing your name, sir. Come on up,
Vicente.
sir. Vicente. And then he will be followed by Willie Johnson. Speakers are reminded they have 3 minutes, and when your time is up, our clerk will sound a buzzer. It's all right, take your time.
Hello? Okay. If I may, first of all, thank you for allowing me to speak here tonight. I would like to extend the message that we offer thought and prayer towards Superintendent Lowengard's health. We present our best hopes and wishes for his family, comfort, and speedy recovery. With great anticipation, we look forward to his valued return and future guidance. We also share the belief that the district will see better days. I'd like to apologize to the board. I'm not going to stay. As you can see, I've got work to do. But I thank you, and that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vicente, for communicating all of our wishes for Superintendent Loengard. I should say, as I think it's pretty public already, Dan is in good spirits. A number of us, myself included, visited him in the hospital, and when I saw him, which was later in the evening, he was laughing and joking, and so rest assured, Dan, I think, has every intention of being back here. Linda, did you want to add something?
I just got a text message. I'll see you at noon tomorrow.
Okay, all right. So your well wishes have already been well received. Thank you again for those comments and reminding everyone that Dan is in our prayers, and our prayers have already been answered. Willie Johnson is the next speaker. Mr. Johnson? I guess Mr. Johnson is not here, so that would allow us to move to the next agenda item. That would be the superintendent's report. Dr. Nelms? I should just remind folks that recently we changed the board's meeting practice. We have 2 general business meetings a month and some special meetings. That was one of the recommendations that was made by Dr. Aquino. And in fact, the board moved on that recommendation before we even issued our report. So what happens during the course of these 2 meetings, for those of you who aren't adjusted to it yet, on one of the business meetings, we have Superintendent Nelms give remarks and give us an update on what's going on at East High School. And then the subsequent meeting, we have the superintendent for the balance of our schools to issue a report. So Dan will no doubt be here at the next meeting and give us a report. Dr. Nelms?
Thank you, Van, Commissioners, and good evening, everyone. This will be a relatively brief report this evening, just with a few updates. We're at the mid-year point, and we're proud of our students and staff for making it through the first semester, and it's been a collaborative effort among everyone to reset for the next few months of school as we push towards graduation. I want to start by thanking Dr. Cecilia Griffith Golden for giving us the opportunity to continue our collaboration on the curriculum front. I know that part of Jaime's report and the work that's been done with TNL and the deputies is to bring more synergy and coordination for the work that we do collectively for all of our students. And we had an opportunity to meet with the TNL directors to discuss the curriculum, to discuss some of the opportunities there, perhaps some gaps in the curriculum, so we can look at a K-12 curricular process in the near future. And I want to say that our team, Dr. Susan Meyer, who presented here in the past, and Andrea Zerlo came back to East and said how impressed they were with the directors and coordinators in TNL for being so open-minded about the curriculum and sharing how we can enhance that work for students at East, but more importantly for all kids in Rochester. So thank you, Cecilia, for your efforts and giving us some space to work together. We are in the process of looking at our data from January to not only place kids in the appropriate classes, but to also start the track towards graduation. We're happy that our students are ahead of where they were last year at this point in the year in terms of exams completed and the trajectory for graduation. So that number will continue to rise throughout June and August. We're excited about that and really excited for this group of students. This is the first group of students who would have started as freshmen and ended as seniors. Believe it or not, the EPO has been in existence for 4 years now. And so I thank the board for starting that program, this program 4 years ago, and to see these first cohort of kids make it through school.
Just so that we always put a point of reference, what was the graduating cohort rate when the U of R first took over?
It was 31%.
That was the actual reported?
That was reported, and then it was 33 by August, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. as I do every year, we have our Black History Month celebration this year. It's going to feature a new theme. There'll be some folks from local fraternities and sororities strolling and stepping for students to talk to them about college, black colleges, historically black colleges, and how the roles that fraternities and sororities play in that. Somehow my arm got twisted to stroll as well. Haven't done it in a while, but I'm sure I'll hurt myself in the process. But that's a Black History Month celebration. You're all invited to see me make a fool of myself, but more importantly, to learn with students around the contributions of Africans and African Americans in society, as well as our year-end hip-hop class is having their performance on February 15th at 2:45. This is a course that we created 2 years ago with a professor from U of R, Dr. Joanne Larson, and it's a course that's totally created and operated by students. And so they have to do research on different artists. They have to either mimic or create new songs. They have to use technology to create music. There's be a ton of performances. There's a school-wide audition. This is always a great event for students. It's all student-driven, all student-created. They produce the entire thing. The adults just kind of get out their way and make sure the music is appropriate. Besides that, it's the kids' day. And so I encourage you to come to either or both of those events.
Do they get credit for that class?
Yep, it's a course. Yep, it's a credited course, a half a semester course, and then we repeat it again the next semester. So, restorative practices. I just want to thank our lower school scholars for finishing their training. I told them I would acknowledge them today. They are now trained to do and facilitate peer mediations. That has been something that we started a few years ago, and it's kind of ramped up. And it's interesting how students are really willing participants in that process. And so what we would do is we will have these students meet with counselors and social workers, mitigate issues between students, continue to check in with them before it gets to the adult level. That has proven to be really effective and restorative in nature. And those 20 students, and there's probably about 40 now in the lower school, they have a sense of pride that they are the true ambassadors for school culture and climate. And that's something that we do a lot of work with the peer group, but also embed Stephen Covey's 7 Habits into their training as well. A few things happening throughout the community. We have this year, we started 2 years ago with getting our lower school kids on college campuses around Rochester, and then we take our upper school students when they go to DC and visit a historically black college. Last year it was Howard University. This year we have 47th and 8th graders attended a trip to SUNY Brockport. We've had students 6th grade at University of Rochester. We have 2 more trips planned in the near future. The intent of these trips is to get students to understand what college campuses look like, the feel, the difference between a 2-year and 4-year, those situated in the city versus urban and suburban, and to get them thinking about college as a place that they can go and succeed and be successful. And then throughout 9th and through 12th grade, they'll continue to add different types of colleges and based on their interests. And that's something that we're really excited about. I know I explained this last year as well. We have the Steps to College program. It's a program that is funded by the William and Sheila Conard Foundation, and where they take 20 kids in 8th grade, move into 9th grade. They'll take another 20 8th graders this year over the summer, and they stay on a college campus for 2 weeks. And they get college courses, college-like courses. They go through, they have to stay on the dorm for those 2 weeks. So parents generously give us their kids for 2 weeks. Although last year parents were bringing up sandwiches and blankets every night, you know. And so we said by the second week we had to let the kids be there by themselves and have some scheduled check-in times. This year we will return to U of R's campus for the next 20 kids. It'll be 40 kids this summer. And then the plan is to grow that out the following year and expand that out to students throughout our CSD. So this will not just be a sole East project. We wanted to get the first 2 years right to know what we were doing. Next year's, we've had interest already from local colleges and universities to take the 3rd year. It will not be on U of R's campus. We want to get the kids onto other campuses throughout the community. And last but certainly not least, I want to just openly and publicly thank Lorna Washington. Lorna has done an incredible job with our community schools work at East. She continues to be a pillar in the community. It's a job that that has expanded since she came from day one, and now she is a true go-to person for all things community school, all things family related. And so I want to thank Lorna publicly for her work. She knew I was going to do that, but sometimes people need to hear the words of thanks, and I really appreciate the work that you do, and look forward to many years to come. That is my report.
All right, any questions?
question.
Yes, Commissioner LeBron?
So thank you, Sean, for your presentation. I just have a question very quickly. Just, I know you guys were having a receivership meeting and was it canceled because of the weather for you guys or the other two schools?
It's the 14th.
Is that meeting going to be televised or are we videotaping it? I don't know if that's a question for you or for us.
We have not videotaped it. I could check to see if it will be. Lauren does all community.
It's actually going to be live streamed. Connected Communities is one of our partners, and they're going to be live streaming it via Facebook.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. That was it, Sean.
Told you,
I
Lauren,
don't think we're doing it
I
for
told
the
you Lauren
other
knows
schools, but I
everything.
want us to make sure that we do it at the other schools too. Thank you.
Okay, all right.
We're recording all.
Perfect, thank you.
All of them have been recorded, and they will be on each individual school's receivership page.
Is there a way to put it on the Rochester City School District Facebook page as well?
Sure, we can do that.
Yeah.
Or at least the playlist of them, so that.
Yeah, the playlist, that would be perfect. Thank you, guys.
Any other questions for Dr. Nelms? Next on the agenda is the EPO's financial report.
Good evening, and thank you for letting me speak again this evening. So we're going to be continuing our financial journey through the fiscal year 18-19, and as Sean stated, we are now midway through the year. And as you may remember from our last presentation, where we left off, we had a positive variance at the end of December 31st, 2018 of $441,000. And when you take a quick look at the tally that we have now before us this evening of January 31st, 19 over January 31st to 18, you're going to see that we have, again, that positive trend continuing, but now we're at about approximately $621,000. The reasons behind those changes really haven't changed drastically or differed drastically from what I presented last month, and I have included all of that detail for you in the subsequent slides. But I think it's important to talk about what's happening behind the scenes, if you will, other than what the numbers are talking about. And so once you build a relationship with the financial team and the superintendent builds a relationship with his administrators and department heads, you will see that there will be a change in the mindset of how people decide to spend their money. And meaning that we go from a mentality of it's my budget, it's what I'm choosing to spend. If I don't spend it, somebody will spend it for me. And so we've moved away from that, and this is a natural progression, but you move away from that and you start moving into the mindset of this is our budget. We are all responsible, we are accountable, and we know that our superintendent has the best needs of our scholars, the program, as well as changes to the facility that needs to be made as far as upgrades and maintenance items. So again, that lends to the positive variance occurring. We've also, over the last couple of years, as the Finance Committee knows, we've implemented a practice called a budget freeze. And a budget freeze means that as of January 31st, there is no additional expending that is not approved by either Sean or myself. And so we go into basically a lockdown, if you will, of the budgetary codes because, again, if you think about it, we are midway through the year, as Sean had stated. And so for all intents and purposes, classrooms should be set up from a instructional supplies standpoint. Everything that the classes need from equipment, whatever they may need, should already be purchased. It should be acquired, we should be done. So at this point in time, we lock down the budget. If someone does have a need, be it from a program standpoint or there's a bleacher system or whatever that doesn't work, we reevaluate and we say, is this the time now that we make this expenditure? Everything is evaluated and then the decision is made and then we move forward. We also start looking at our purchase orders, and what that means is that we have encumbered money against our budgetary codes. So the purchase orders are reviewed and we have to determine whether or not those purchase orders are in alignment with the needs for the rest of the year. If a purchase order, if we had established a purchase order and it's not needed with a contract vendor, it needs to be liquidated. If that purchase order simply needs to be reduced, we do that as well. That further allows us to have a more accurate determination of our fund balance for the remaining portion of the year. So again, as I stated, the reasons for the changes within predominantly the compensation expense, was that reduction of the 13 teachers and 2 support staff positions. So that will just continue to multiply out through the rest of the year because that is an ongoing savings that is realized, very real savings. Again, the capital outlay expenditure has increased. You'll see that as well. The positive variance has increased there as well. And so again, if you compare year over year, at this same time last year, we were going through the same process. We went into our budgetary freeze. We started looking at expenditures. What did the facility need? What did program need? And we started expending that money, and we will do, again, the same thing again this year where it's needed to use our money to the best purposes. With regard to the positive variance within facilities-related expenditures and technology, again, it's the same reason that I gave you last month. It's just a continuation of how we arrived at that positive variance. All other variable expenditures, again, I sound like a broken record because I repeated this. I'm repeating it from last month. But it was our intention to move away from the utilization of external vendors. And there, wherever possible, where we had existing money or existing relationships within our budget, already budgeted within the general fund, we would then try and find appropriate grants that would cover those expenditures. So what you're doing is you're moving the money out of the general fund and into the special aid fund. So long story short, what that does then is increases the fund balance in the general fund. And I want to talk a little bit about that because you were also provided this evening not only with the A fund, the appropriation report for the A fund, you also had the G fund, the special aid fund, presented to you this evening as well. So if you think about it, in the general fund, the A fund, we're focusing in on expenditures in that document that was sent to you. So we're looking to see what was budgeted, what was expended, and how much do we have available. What is available is really the driver. What is our fund balance at the end of the year? The G fund is different. The G fund is where you're looking to see what grants have been approved and are we utilizing those grants to the best of our ability to do so, meaning are we expending the money? You want the money to be expended under the grant fund, under the G fund. So again, that's just a helpful hint on how to look at those two reports and differentiate between them. On that G fund, you had 2 primary grants listed. One would be Title I, and the other one was the optics grant. And so that's what's being reflected in that number. So again, in summary, you have a positive variance year over year at the same time of $620,000, $621,000. And we expect that trend to continue, and we also expect that we will be able to return unexpended funds to the district at year end. So I open it up for questions, recommendations, suggestions, whatever you have.
Any questions? Yes.
I'm going to wait and see who else had a question, but on the appropriations report, I note that the budget in the area of textbooks and library books was spent over the budget, which I don't think anyone here is going to fault for spending more on textbooks. But is there a transfer of funds, a budget transfer in the offing in the near future to accommodate that?
Are you looking at
Cash capital outlays, I'm sorry, I wasn't specific.
Okay, are you looking at the A fund?
I'm looking at page 1 of 2 of appropriations by major account. It says 1 of 2, but it's actually the third page. Under cash capital outlays, you have textbook, I'm sorry, it's not text, yes, equipment other than buses, I'm sorry. I was looking at the wrong line. Equipment other than buses is 142% of the budgeted amount.
Oh, so you're looking at 2018.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. It's okay because it's a great question. It's a great question. What that actually reflected in 2018 was we were trying to stay ahead of that whole community schools grant. debacle. And so we were expending the money thinking that we had it approved, and we did have it approved. So we're expending money out of the G fund, or out of the A fund, to then later have it reimbursed. So in the subsequent reports, you would actually see that number turning back into a positive number, as the general fund would be reimbursed by the special aid fund.
Okay.
It's a good question.
Good, thank you for that explanation. I noted in the heading that it didn't specifically say East High, and I wanted to point that out, but I didn't notice that it was 2018 and not 2019. So thank you for giving us a comparison. I appreciate that.
Any other questions? There being no further questions, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Did you have another question?
Motion to approve the East High's EPO financial report?
It's been moved. Is there a second? Second. It's been seconded by Commissioner Hallmark. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All right. That would move us to the review of diversity recruitment and hiring initiatives. This portion of the meeting will be facilitated by Vice President Elliott.
Harry, I was not supposed to be here tonight, but my plans got changed, so I apologize for being here.
It's all good.
That weather thing.
It's all good.
Thank you.
President Elliott.
Thank you. Let me just, first of all, just thank you for putting this together for us, your department and your diversity champion for putting this together. And this is something that is very dear to the heart of the board. And we want to get better and better and better. And I'm looking forward to the opportunity of when we have our HR committee so we can really begin to look at what do we need to do in order to recruit and retain people of color, particularly in the classroom. And I know that with this budget constraint, and we know that we're going to, we have some significant financial challenges this year. But I do know, and this is something that we can discuss as a body in the future, and you know, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, Xerox had a plan that they laid off based on the demographic quota. So that may be an opportunity for us to discuss with our union partners, but there's got to be a way, and I don't believe that this board is going to back up off of this, and that we want to ensure that who we hire, that we can also retain. And so this is something that, you know, if we have to go to court on, I don't have a problem in going to court on, because we've got to make sure that the people who are in front of our children, and not just my kind, but my kin, meaning that they don't, it ain't about the skin color, but they got to make sure that they understand our history and able to communicate that and teach that to our children. And so with that, I would just ask you to make your presentation to us, please.
Thank you very much. And good evening, President White, Vice President Elliott, and Commissioners. So tonight, I'm going to spend my next 10 minutes really to share with you the current state of diversity for the Rochester City School District. But before we begin that conversation, I think it's important to understand the current state of diversity across this nation, because there is a systemic issue as relates to diversity and recruitment, and it's a national issue, not just a Rochester City School District issue. So if you go to the first slide, again, I wanted to share a little bit of a background as it per the New York State Department of Education. And again, they recognize the fact that there is a severe shortage of teachers across the country, okay? They also recognize the fact that the racial makeup of the elementary and secondary school teachers' workforce does not match the diversity of the students. So we all know this, right? But they are basically putting this in writing and saying, yeah, there is a problem. In addition to that, what they're saying is that while students of color are expected to make up 56% of the population by 2024, again, the teacher population is overwhelmingly white. And again, we're seeing that in the district numbers that we have here. But again, it's not just a Rochester issue, it's across the nation. Lastly, they state that while the report shows 82% of public school teachers are identified as white, and this figure has remained in place for over the past 15 years. So again, I say it's a systemic issue, one that's going to require serious, out-of-the-box thinking and innovative thoughts, and very similar to what you shared, Vice President Elliott, as far as working with the unions and figuring out a way, even in light of these budget reductions, okay, because we all know the story, last in, first out, okay? So we have to figure out a way to be innovative in that regard so that we protect the investment that we made in bringing in our new hire bilingual and African-American teachers so that they don't get caught up in our financial issues, okay? Let me stop there for a second to see if there's any questions, and I'll be more than happy to answer those questions.
I have a question, Harry.
Yes.
What do you suggest? Because like you just said, the last folks that are in are typically, even if we specifically target teachers of color, but they're last to come in, they're the first to go out. So given the state of the budget, I know you're saying to be creative, but what do you suggest? Because right now under the contract, that's how it is. And I know that there was conversations that the contract's open, but I'm seeing emails that was a lie, that the contract's not open right now.
Right.
And so I've heard also that we can offer retirement packages to some of our seasoned or senior teachers so that we can make room for those, but that also has a cost.
Yeah, so there's a couple, I'm sorry.
Let me just defer to Carl, he raised his hand. Thank you, Harry.
Excuse me, Harry. One misconception that I want to correct, and I think it's important that we get on the record early about this. The last in, first out business has nothing to do with the union contract. It's required by a section of the education law called 2510. It's a statutory matter that the union cannot waive. So the solution here is not to somehow work with the union to magically negotiate some solution, because they are not empowered to agree to anything that will contradict the provisions of 2510. So
Well,
that's an important thing for us to understand.
No, that's a good thing.
Now, there are other innovative ways that I know Harry has already considered and will probably talk to you about in a moment. So I'll quit taking Harry's time and go back to my chair.
So let me just say, and I'll open up if some other people have questions. That's something that we probably need to talk about as we go into our committees. What are the creative ways, if that's the law of the land, what are the creative ways that we can, because from my perspective, I think it has to do within our training in what we are requiring white teachers to have, and even black teachers, because there are a number of us who are still just learning so much of our history. There are just some things that I learned today. So that's another conversation that we have as a committee that I think we have to have. Any questions? Any questions? Okay.
So could I just add on to what Carl had shared? And again, and speaking of seniority, so there are certain seniority contractual rights that have to be addressed. The other avenue to come at, Commissioner LeBron, your question is that we have to look at attrition, okay? We have to look at, because again, keeping in mind that there are various different tenure areas, okay, that the diversity candidates would fall into. So for example, if in fact, if we have an early retirement plan, okay, and let's just say 25 English teachers decide to retire, okay? So that doesn't mean that I have to let go 25 math teachers, okay? So it's really looking at the metric, the number, and trying to, I'm not going to say get creative, but you try to look at exactly where the shortages are and try to see what the minimum, the less impact, again, to those new people, the bilingual and the African-American students, the teachers that have just come in. So
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
yeah, so again, we'll share all that with you, especially during budget reduction time, so you have some sense as to the target number that we're targeted as far as teachers are being reduced, and share with you the demographics of those. Okay.
And just to Carl's point, let me just point out this. Even with that law, that's a racist law, because white folk are going to always win out, because it's a majority white country. right? So, but there's got to be a way in which this system is not working for black and brown. If it works, you've got to work twice as hard in order to be successful, all right? And so it doesn't work for us. And so we've got, even if we got to sue the state, I don't have any problem with us suing the state, because there's got to be a way in which we can work collaboratively, that it impacts everybody. What happens, unfortunately, because this was designed this way, because if it was in South Africa, it would be a whole different system. That's why they were able to have a black president, because they used the majority rule. But in this case, if we want people to excel, we have to look at things differently. And also, no, all black people don't want to learn white history. You know, so there's got to be a way in which we can work together. There's a lot of things that I believe that is because we don't know who we are. There's no connection with a lot of the white teachers in our system with what the experiences are of our everyday student. So I don't have a problem. If we got to go to court on the state of this, I'm prepared to do it.
Or the answer may be rather than...
Carl, can you go to the mic? I'm sorry. No, it's okay.
Rather than a negotiation with the union, then perhaps the answer is to enter in a negotiation with the state.
Yeah, whatever it is. I thought it was the union, but we can.
No, ma'am.
Yeah.
No, he's saying it's the
Thank
state.
you. Thank you.
Can I just
Sure.
also ask, in some states, I did find that black and brown teachers have been granted special protections based on the number of students that they're serving and the shortage of diversity within their district. And I don't know if that's something that this board can explore with the state because it's a state law. I do want to go back though, because I know you were talking about presenting certain teachers in categories. I do know bilingual teachers, which is a specialty and a high demand, they're going to be safe no matter when they came in. Special education is a protected class as well, so they're going to also be safe. And what I'm saying is, if we have this education law, could we all figure out a way to implement some of those same special protections for our black and brown teachers who may not be certified in special education or ELA or bilingual?
Commissioner, did you want a response from him at this point, or?
No,
Okay,
I'll throw it
yeah.
out there, but that's something to think about
Okay.
because they do have certain special protections based on their certifications, and we should be able to figure out a way to do that within the state as well.
And so I have to look at my...
I know, we'll talk.
Commissioner Powell?
Okay.
For bilingual and ELA, well, it's a high demand, so we would not eliminate special education or bilingual.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's within a practice
Yeah.
too.
Commissioner Powell?
What Commissioner LeBron is getting at is the fact that we have had a shortage in those areas for some time now, where the probabilities of layoffs in those particular fields are slim and none, right? But I'd like to address some of the assumptions in the questions that you asked in the beginning. One assumption is that the state is not going to come through with any more aid to help close the budget gap. I was just at Albany, Everton was too, but we may have come back from Albany with different impressions of what's happening in Albany, but I can tell you that while the governor is taking a hard line and is basically saying that Contract for Excellence is dead and it's done and it's over with and I don't have to abide by it, the fact is that Contract for Excellence still exists in the law. And, you know, I'm not comparing our governor to the leader of a banana republic, but banana republics, what defines them is the passage of laws that they only use when it suits them to oppress their people. So, you know, if you're ignoring laws that are designed to help the population, then you're doing the same thing as passing laws that oppress the people. The change in the Senate to becoming a Democratic majority Senate has had some surprising results. The downstate 8 that are Bronx and parts of Long Island are really feeling they're freshman senators, but they're really feeling their oats. They're feeling very supported by the Senate Education Committee chair, who is Senator Shelley Mayer, who was an woman prior to this, and very much feeling supported by their new majority leader. So we may find a very different dynamic and a lot of pushback against the governor. I don't know what that's going to look like in terms of dollars from the state, but we may be surprised. The other assumption that Commissioner LeBron makes is that not only that there will be layoffs, but that they would be in excess of attrition. We always do have significant attrition. It's often enough that so long as they're in the right subject areas, we don't have to do layoffs. But let's suppose they are not. If there were a retirement incentive that could be given, there's still two decisions to make. One is the breakage, does the cost of offering the incentive more than we would save by having those teachers retire and allow us to keep less expensive teachers, or even hire brand new teachers who are by definition less expensive? And if an incentive package were offered, what differential, what additional cost would we as a board be willing to absorb for the sake of keeping our black and brown teachers? As our general counsel said, those are decisions that we have to make. It may be that the cost of offering an incentive will actually reduce our overall workforce costs. It's usually the way it is, or we don't agree to it. But in the instance of a very specific desire to keep our newly hired black and brown teachers, we could potentially offer an incentive package for the express purpose of being able to keep every last new hire that we have. That would be within our prerogative to do.
So I just want to clarify, I'm not making assumptions. This budget deficit is very real. The staff have been working extremely hard at identifying areas that they're going to cut. There is an expectation right now that almost every department will have to make cuts. So I just want to throw that on the record. It's not an assumption.
Yeah, Mr.
And I'm
President.
very well of the economic opportunity cost when we talk about these decisions that we have to make. So I want to put that on the record. So the questions are relevant because if we're talking about recruiting teachers of color, which we absolutely need and we want as a board, I think we can agree as a board on that we don't bring them in and we have this deficit and then we end up having to lay them off. There's an opportunity cost there. I would not be voting or supporting that, but I also am a realist and have to be realistic that we do have a budget deficit. And I do want to say for the record that we had a budget hearing with the community and with parents this weekend. It was very well communicated that there's a deficit. We're going to be making cuts to hear from the community. And there's things that the community expressed that they did not want this board to cut. This did not come up, but restorative justice and restorative practices was one of those areas that they were very strongly felt that should not be cut. Transportation was one of them. They want us to do transportation for pre-K. So there are things. So these are not assumptions. And I just wanted to throw that on the record because this will become record and I don't want anybody to think I'm making assumptions. This is very real and happening in our district with this deficit.
Okay, let me,
Yeah.
let me,
I'm gonna be very
hold on,
kind about it,
hold on,
please.
hold on. Let me interject for a second. I want to explain to everybody, including my colleagues, how this new format is going to work. Previously, when we had general board meetings, the board president always facilitated and sometimes mediated the conversations. We've decided that we are going to have our committees sort of in a suspended period, and during that period of time, we'll talk about things topically. While we talk about things like, for example, diversity recruitment and hiring, it is understood that a board member who has an interest in a particular subject will facilitate that conversation. Let me be clear about this. As that happens, there is one person who will identify speakers, and that will be the facilitator. If I have to step in, I will. But right now, the facilitator of this conversation, we've got to be clear about this because we want this to be orderly. You don't speak until you're recognized by the facilitator. That's how we got to do this, because that keeps it all fair and balanced. So right now, the facilitator of the conversation is Vice President Elliott. And moreover, let me remind you all what some of you may or may not have seen. An email was sent from Dr. Lee describing specifically that each of these topical areas, you would be given 10 minutes. We're already beyond that period. So, again, I would remind facilitators who I will introduce at the beginning of each topical session that you are charged with identifying speakers and keeping it to 10 minutes. Vice President Elliott.
All right, so we'll just be real quick about it, and so because we're already over time, and we'll let Harry get through to his report.
Very quickly, thank you for recognizing me, Commissioner Elliott. I was not expressing in any way hostility or I wasn't trying to imply anything by saying assumption. There are always assumptions, and in this case, I'm not saying that Commissioner LeBron was assuming. I was saying that the very basis of the comment, of the remark, the place that we start the conversation at, assumes a common understanding of things like where we are with the budget, what it means to do layoffs, what it means to have attrition. So I was not by any means, Commissioner LeBron, attacking you or your question. I was trying to add to the conversation. Period. End of story. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay.
Continue, Harry.
Yeah, let me just say this. I think this is a very critical conversation, so I appreciate the dialogue. And I will also say if I need to come back to present at some future date, I'd be more than happy to do that, okay? So real quickly, going on to slide number 2, okay? If you look at slide number 2, the message here really is this, is that when we compare the city school district with our sister districts, you'll see that while we are performing somewhat better than them, okay, we are not there yet. And so again, the message is that the national average is 82% white, 18% diverse. We are 75% white and 25% diverse. You can see the notes or the statistics for Buffalo and Syracuse. And again, the key message here is that we still have a lot to do. And we're not just sitting back resting on the fact that we're doing better than them. We know that we've got to do even better. So that's where that is, okay? The next page really talks about the strategic initiatives that we've already implemented. And again, I'm not going to read these verbatim. You can read these. If you have any questions on them, you feel more than free to ask me. However, I want to point out 2 quick ones. And it's the second bullet from the last one, is that we're partnering with the multilingual department of T&L, New York State Ed, as well as SUNY Brockport, to develop a pathway for certification of bilingual teachers. So we have roughly right about 20 per diem subs who have certifications from Puerto Rico in this cohort, and we're working with them to try to get them certified, hopefully by the beginning of the new school year. The other one that I want to point out to you real quickly is that the second bullet is that we modified our offer letters now that includes a precondition of hiring for all new hires that they must go through a implicit bias workshop. So those are the 2 bullets I want to point out. Again, feel free to ask me any questions at some point, and I'll be happy to respond. The next slide talks about the Distinguished Educator Report, and again, I think you've all seen that report, as well as the district's responses to them, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on those, but in that document, you'll see our strategic action plan, which I specifically designed for the African American as well as the bilingual recruitment efforts, and again, it's probably a 20-page document that will take you through that line by line, okay? Real quickly here, the next 3 pages, I just want to let you know.
Harry,
Yes.
you keep on saying real quickly.
Okay, all right, okay, I'm done. No, just real quickly. The next 3 pages really just shares with you where we've been. I mean, I know some of you are asking, what are we doing, where are we at? That's where we've been. And then the last 2 slides really pertain to some of the data. If you look at the data, you'll see that for all employees, right, in the 3-year trending for all employees, you'll see trends upward, downward. But I think the message here is that we're starting to show a trend in which we're decreasing the white population and trying to do our best to move up the other components. The thing that you need to be aware of is the yellow circle, the yellow box, right? That is where individuals identify themselves as not specified, okay? Historically, not specified means that we have people of color who normally identify themselves in that category. So if you flush that number out, my message there is that your numbers, our numbers, will be a little bit higher in those areas. The last page refers to teachers only, okay? Here again, you can see the trending, okay, from what we've done as far as the white, African-American, and the Latino populations. Again, we have still much work to do, but again, if you see the not specified, that information will spread primarily to your diversity population. So that's the long story or the short story, or somewhere in between story, and we'll go from there.
Commissioner Shepherd?
Yeah, so I just wanted to throw out there real quick. I know that we are, see, I'm following you. I know we are supposed to be getting through these presentations in 10 minutes, but I definitely don't want the information to be rushed, especially because we have people that are watching just for future reference because they're trying to follow along. And the second thing I did want to say is just in regards to us talking about what we needed to do to keep staff based on how we want to recruit. And I want us as a board to think about where the next discussion should be in regards to what we are going to do with our unions, because at the end of the day, we're not supposed to be adversaries. And even though the state law talks about staff, in particular what Carl was talking about, it refers to staff that are tenured, that they should also be working with us if we are going to go to the state in regards to what we need to do to follow our plan. So I do want to put that out there, that we should think about when the next conversation is going to happen, since legislative sessions are open right now.
That Commissioner Shepherd brings, I was just leaning over to the president and asking him about this format because what I was saying to the president was, now that we've had this presentation and this committee report, does that mean we can't talk about this in this 6-month time frame? Because we need more than just 10 minutes. And so, but it seems that we made the decision to suspend, collapse the committees, and I'm not sure where the 10-minute came from. But I was expecting to spend at least a half hour or more. So I'm not sure where that came from, but I think we need to revisit that. And, you know, this is a lesson learned, but we need to revisit that, because we can't just wait 6 months. Once what we are, what's the word I'm looking for? This new process, whether it works or not, we still have business that we have to attend to. So I think this is something, you know, not necessarily for this time, but we're going to have to discuss, particularly when it comes to HR issues. So, Commissioner LeBron.
I agree, and my understanding was that when we broke down these committees, that we would have these conversations added to the board business meeting, and I was not aware that there was any time limit of 10 minutes. I would even say 30 minutes, depending on which one may be too short too, because this is actual business that we have to discuss and know. We're making these decisions, we're voting, we should understand all of these things. So I don't know where the 10 minutes came from, and I do also want to publicly apologize for speaking and not waiting my turn for you to call me as you are facilitating this, so I want to apologize to you for that.
Let me just say, on that particular note, no apologies are necessary. I know it was directed to Vice President Elliott, but everybody's going to make those mistakes as we figure out our way through this new process. So I have made countless mistakes, and others will as well, and there's really no need to apologize, because There was no offense intended. Let me just say on this, before we move on.
And let me just,
yes.
Thank you so very much, Harry. I thank you for the report. And further, you know, we need to have more dialogue about this. I think this is an exciting time. I think we've got the right board to want to move this through. And I'm looking forward. I just think we got some great opportunity here. Thank you so very much.
Appreciate it.
Sorry.
No, that's right. Thanks. Thank you, Vice President Elliott. That was a good way to sort of end that particular section. But I do want to respond to a number of comments that people have made and indicate that I agree with everything that has been said. In terms of the 10 minutes, I think, I believe what happened was Dr. Lee, trying to do her best to organize this new approach, sent out an email to everybody, board members and staff, and said 10 minutes. Sometimes is the case, people don't respond, so people are thinking that's the way it's going to be. Now, that doesn't mean, again, this is a learning process, that we can't change that. One of the things that we said, we were going to suspend the committees for 6 months so we could sort of look at what we were doing. So a reasoned response to even today's meeting is to say, okay, is 15 minutes enough? Doesn't sound like, for most people, that it is enough. And so there'll be some follow-up conversations about that, and expect that, per your wishes, there'll be more than 15 minutes. But I got to say, at a certain point, if somebody sends you an email, if Dr. Lee sends you an email and says, how about a half an hour? Again, it's important that we respond and say, I don't even think a half an hour is going to work, because she's going to operate, or our staff is going to operate on the assumption that the time period that is given is suggested in an email. If it's not responded to, which I got to say, sometimes that happens, she's going to go forward. So I think that's, everybody wants to know how that happened. I think that's how that happened. But again, we can add more time to that. Let me also add something that is going to surprise a lot of people to hear me say. The more, and I'm not saying on this topic we shouldn't spend more time. The more time we spend on the details, some would say, and this is not my phrase, this is, you know this is not my phrase, we're in the wrong lane. At a certain point, we should be making, and this really should shock most of you to hear me say this, at a certain point, we should be making decisions and then saying, go to it, and you work out the details, administration. And by the way, that's not Van White speaking, that sounds like Dr. Jaime Aquino. So one of the reasons why some might say, and it wouldn't normally be me, to limit the conversation is it limits our engagement in the details, in the weeds. We talk more broadly, we take the thousand-mile viewpoint, and then they go ahead and make it happen. Now, I'm just saying, that's what some would say about us having hour-long, 2-hour-long meetings. That's what I think Dr. Aquino was saying. We were getting too much involved, immersed in the details. So I'm just saying that's what people might say. But again, be mindful. This is a 6-month experiment. If we decide that this format, whether we give ourselves an hour, 45 minutes, and let's say we extend it to an hour, and then it says, wait a second, this sounds like a regular committee meeting. We have every right, having done due diligence and tried this approach, to say, hey, you know what, this isn't working. So please send your suggestions about time to Francine and copy in Shanae, because she'll be back shortly, because I think everybody agrees 15 minutes is not enough.
Just,
yes,
let me just interject here. And I think that what our staff does is great, but I also think that you don't know until you get into it.
Yep.
Right, you have to physically work this thing out, and that's got to be another part of us learning how this process is going to work. We have to walk it out, if you will. And so we walk this out, and we recognize that 10 minutes is not enough.
Yep.
So that's a lesson learned.
Yep,
so we have to include lessons learned in this. And we can even say yes to to the 10 minutes or whatever the case may be, but you really don't know until you get involved in it. Now, to your point about getting into the weeds of things, I think what it's doing, particularly with, I believe, new colleagues, and it was for me, and it still is for me, this is a learning process. So even when we may ask questions that may seemingly be questions that are for the administration, it helps us in terms of making our decisions around policy. And so I'm not getting, and on that part, I don't necessarily agree with the report, because I think it's important for us to really understand what is coming from administration. So when we advocate, number one, and number two, as we make, formulate and is expected to approve policy, we have, background in terms of being able to make that. So I think it's important that we ask the questions, so that we all get an understanding. It's been, 12 years for me. There's still a lot of things that I don't know around here. And so I think it's important to ask the questions because I think it informs us in terms of our decision-making around policy.
Commissioner Powell?
A couple of suggestions for going forward. Number one, if the time frame were on our agenda,
Yeah,
so that we
I think that's
had a heads up before the topic is raised of how much time and adjust our expectations accordingly. Secondly, it is a consent agenda, but if we went through this simple act of approving the agenda, we would quickly discover whether there are concerns about a topic not having enough time. Before we even engage in that conversation, we can modify the agenda to give it more time.
Sure. Well, the latter point is easy to accomplish at the beginning of every meeting. Francine, and I had actually talked to Shanae about this, could you make sure that the times, whatever we agree to, is reflected on the agenda? So this is worth taking the time to do it now before we move on to our next topic. Do you all sense that maybe a half an hour is the next level of time that we ought to try for these topics? And it might be topic dependent. Some topics may not need a half an hour. Or should the person who's facilitating make the recommendation about how much time? What do you all think about that approach?
So I just want a couple of things, because can I just go back a little bit and then talk about the time piece? So I thought we were not legally allowed to vote on this type of thing via email. So there are times where we may get an email from staff on a question about changing a meeting time that we're having in private. But because this is part of our board business meeting, that's why I did not respond to the 10 minutes. I thought we were told we could not vote legally on these things via email, that it needed to be public. So I have a question about that. Maybe Carl, do you understand what I'm saying? There was a question about the 10 minutes. My understanding was that we're not supposed to do that type of board business via email. So I'll let Carl answer that first.
If board members are sent a request for information from the clerk, the board members can individually respond, and that does not constitute the transaction of business. It's when the board gets into colloquy via email.
What?
A discussion, exchange back and forth of ideas. That constitutes board business.
So the clerk sends the idea and we all email back and forth in that
Back
email?
and forth to the clerk.
So if we send her, so if she emails us and we send one individual email back to her, but
Yes,
not
ma'am.
reply all?
And you can even reply all, because that's just information. That's not a discussion between board members. The
But board members
communication
will start.
is between the clerk and the commissioner. Copies to the other commissioner, just information for them. They aren't participating in the discussion. You're just informing them of what you said. But that's not transaction business.
Okay. The other thing about discussions needed about the issues, this overview, I personally feel, is not just going into the weeds. We as a board are the ones who ultimately are going to decide and vote on what gets cut and what priorities we're going to stand behind. So I do think it's a critical conversation to have. I don't think 30 minutes is enough either. I think that if my understanding again was that when you guys collapsed the committees, that they were just, my understanding again was that they were just going to be put before these board business meetings, one topic at a time. And so 10 minutes, 15 minutes, that's for me not enough time. But in addition, I thought we literally were just going to move the committee over, and at minimum, it would be an hour minimum. And yeah, if it's a quick 10-minute presentation and there are no questions, then we move on and we keep moving with the board business meeting. But to limit it to 10 minutes, and I'm not supporting that. I don't think that's enough time to go through all the things and the work that needs to be done.
So Commissioner Davis?
For myself, in determining how much time we need, it would be helpful to have these presentations beforehand, so that if I have questions or I could share that at the meeting, and that would help discussion.
Can I just say, it's on board docs, and so you have access to board docs before the meeting. We usually do get a packet with some of the presentations, but sometimes we don't get those on time sometimes. Let me just throw that out there. So you can check board docs before the meeting and read them. Just want to throw that out there.
Just looked and it wasn't there.
Yeah, the PowerPoints aren't regularly on board docs in advance, but I think it's a thoughtful point that she would, in order to assess how much time we need to allot, if you knew what what was in the PowerPoint, it might make a difference, because then you might know how much time the staff person needed, and you would also need to know what kind of questions you might have. I tell you what, I think there's some additional discussion that has to be had on how we'll proceed. I could see us doing a number of different things. It could be the facilitator recommending to the board president and to Shanae how much time she needs or he needs in advance of the as the agenda is being developed. We could reach some consensus as to generally how much time we want. Again, what I suggest for tonight is that we have this conversation, as I said earlier on, with Dr. Lee and Francine. Let's have some discussion offline about this and figure out what the best way to proceed. Personally, I'm thinking the best way to proceed is have the facilitator, who's most familiar with the topic, suggest an allotted amount of time. But let's talk about that some more. Again, Shanae has done a great job, and Francine has picked up the ball trying to help us through this new system. Let me also add a couple other quick remarks about this approach. I think as we consider agenda items and the follow-up for the agenda items, we should be thinking about keeping these discussions when we have them and the follow-up and what is necessary, keeping those conversations aligned with the goals that we gave to Dan Loengard. Additionally, as we put these topics on the agenda and as we consider what follow-up is necessary, that follow-up and that topical discussion should also be in line with our response to the DE's report. So a lot of this stuff, as it may turn out, may not be relevant to those goals which we agreed to and to the DE's report which the board as a majority agreed to. So I just think it's important that we keep in a framework even the conversations, because frequently what happened with our committee meetings, it was out of context. There was no reason why a particular subject was coming up other than the chairperson said, or somebody said, let's have this particular conversation. We now have at least two frameworks within which to have these topics come up. One would be the board goals, and the other, which we agreed to with Daniel Loengard, and the second would be our response. If it can't fit within that framework, if it doesn't enhance those two sets of documents, I'm just saying to you, I don't know that we should even be considering it. But, and that was admittedly one of the problems with our committees. They weren't aligned to any broader framework. So having said that, I now turn the gavel over to Commissioner Hallmark for a discussion of board retreat and the sessions calendar.
Okay, thank you, President White. So if everyone will look in their packets, they'll see the governance section from the DE report, where we have the recommendations and then our action items and some timelines and responses, what we turned into Albany. So we have that here tonight for reference. I didn't anticipate that we would have kind of a work session on governance here tonight, but I do want to put a few things in front of everyone, which is, so the function of governance is to help us work better together as a team and work as a team with the superintendent as well. And so to do that, we have to look at our structures. You know, are we using good structures? How do we make choices? I mean, just the conversation we had about how much time we want to spend on the topics here. So it seems to me there's kind of two kinds of work sessions that we need that wouldn't necessarily take place here in a business meeting around governance issues. The first would be work sessions around structure, like where we can talk about, do we like how the question logs are working? How do we pick a tool for self-assessment? how shall we organize our meetings? Those sorts of conversations. I don't think that we would do that here in the business meeting, but we might want to do a work session. So that's one category of work sessions that we would do under under the umbrella of governance. And then the other would be more content sessions, like in-services or PDs, like I have mentioned in pretty recent meetings that we have all been showing expressed interest in Taylor law, because there's questions about contracts and unions and things like that. And so we would like to get that kind of work session where we could ask questions and get content presented to us. So there's that kind. Or working on group dynamics, like the peace circles, restorative circles, retreats, talking about the dynamics among the groups. So I kind of see those as two types of work sessions, the ones that are oriented towards content and our relationship, and others that are oriented towards how can we structure ourselves better. So just with that as an overview, if you sort of glance through this, I don't know how many pages this is, 20, almost 30 pages, just to pull out some of the highlights from our responses to the governance section. We had talked about writing some guidelines about the difference between governance and management, and putting that in our bylaws, and that would probably need a work session on that in the category of structure. Again, the Taylor law, we'd like to get that PD there. Restorative circle meeting, we've talked about that. In fact, we've discussed March 18th, I think, is coming up. In the report, we mentioned having quarterly board self-assessments, and we need to pick some tools on that. So there's kind of a long list of stuff I don't need to go through all of it. But I just want to put that out as an opening shot and find out what folks think about this, and we can just have kind of a brief conversation about all of this. Yes.
I'm glad this topic followed my last comments, because I think this is a textbook example of how we want to integrate our new approach to meetings with our response to the Distinguished Educators Report. And what I mean by that is, Dr. Jaime Aquino will make periodic reports to the commissioner in terms of how we are doing with executing that plan. If we use this committee structure, this new meeting structure, and we discipline ourselves to focus these topical areas, governance, diversity, recruitment, on things that we told them we were going to do, we won't have to worry about whether, when Jaime comes back, whether we've done what we said we were going to do. Do you see what I'm saying? So it is really critically important, not only because it gives us focus and it gives us framework, but what he's going to do. And I'm going to tell you, I talked to him less than a couple days ago, and I think he's already or just issued a quarterly report.
Just in the process, it's practically done. We emailed about it today.
Yep. So, and there's stuff in there, real time, about what we're doing and what we're not doing. And I'm saying this new structure of agendas and having people facilitate conversations and the follow-up, if it doesn't relate to this, which I think is a textbook example of how a district should respond to a Distinguished Educators Report. We're not the first, and we're not going to be the last, and others will use this as an example, this document. But if we don't follow this document and create a system for monitoring and managing what we say we're going to do, we're going to be right back where we started. So I think what you just said is introduction allows us to do that, because you went back to the report and said, okay, so the conversations in this particular topical session about retreats and professional development, what we should be saying is, what did we promise and where are we at with that? Right?
Okay. Question. Sure. So what is our next step, Commissioner? Because I thought that we talked about getting together, and after we completed this report, we probably should have had an opportunity just to get together. So I think that there's some things that we can do in terms of developing our relationships, and so I think that we probably need to begin to do something. If that's a retreat, I think there's something coming up in March around peace circles. So I think that we probably need to begin to operationalize this. So.
I agree. That's one thing that's on the agenda is the March 18th meeting with, who's facilitator?
Restorative peace initiatives. Partners. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Say that again one more time, Ruth. Thank you.
They're the ones that are doing that?
Yep.
Yeah. So that's one thing on the calendar, sort of in the category of our relationships. I think sort of on the structuring of things, there's a lot of stuff in here, and I get a little overwhelmed looking at all the stuff that we promised, and I think sort of to make sense of it and to organize it, I would feel more comfortable if we made some sort of timeline and a list that said, you know, first this, next that, next that, next that, because it feels like it's all, it's very dense.
Beth, sorry about that. I remember you and I were speaking about a timeline, and I emphasized, and I mentioned this to Dan, that I thought we needed a project manager for this. This is, and we'll get behind if we don't have someone who has their eye on the prize. But in having that conversation with you, I remember you saying Anne Marie Lerner, who's sitting back there, might be able, and she didn't commit you to anything, by the way, but you might be able to get somebody to sort of draw this whole thing out in one big long timeline. Can our information specialist, or can somebody do that? Because I think she's got a good idea. Commissioner Hallmark has a good idea. Is that possible?
Yeah, Anne-Marie, yes, Anne-Marie and I did speak about it, about what kind of software system we could adapt internally to do that for all of us, so that it has the action item, you know, however we decide to monitor ourselves, red, yellow, green light, and by the date, and people could add their actions as they went. So we are in the beginning stages of talking about that, but we'll have to move quickly. The other thing is, I know that Dan, we will be reviewing all of it with Dan and with the executive team to disperse and make sure we're on top of the work. So that started, as you can see, in a lot of those items, but we'll be monitoring it as we go. So we're in discussion with Anne Marie about it, and also with Dan with the executive team.
Okay, thanks. Any other comments?
President.
Yes.
And I want to remind you all that the board picked a particularly tight time frame. A lot of our due deadlines come in June. And again, when I said the board, we all looked at this. Some of you may not have voted for it, but let me be clear about this. You own this. This is a board document, and we are all going to be judged on it. By a majority vote, we concluded that we were going to own this. So I just want to be clear to people out there. I know my colleagues know this. There's no, well, I didn't vote for it, so that board member doesn't have to do it. We all own it, and so we will all be judged by it. So when Dr. Aquino gives his quarterly reports, to be honest with you, he's going to say what the board is doing. And as you all have witnessed and heard, let's keep it real. There's real dialogue talking about, people think, oh, well, they're going to help us deal with the unions. No. What they're talking about this state is how they're going to deal with the board if we don't do what we're supposed to do. So, and this is how this is the report card, right? So, all of us are going to be judged by it. So I really need Beth to talk to Anne Marie, with permission, of course, with Dan, to help us get a timeline so we can all see when our deliverables are due. And if we have to make adjustments to them, I suggest to my colleagues that you take a second look at this, because this is a living, breathing document. I said that to the commissioner when it was submitted. I'll say it again. If there are changes, it's not satisfactory, you still have every opportunity to make those changes now, whether it's a date or something substantive, so long as you can get 4 members to agree with you. But what we have to get out of this, Dr. Hallmark, is a commitment from the administration to help us all out with a timeline.
So that's a good point. And I think another thing too, get clarity about for ourselves is, we use the language quarterlies and semi-annual retreats in this report, in our response. And I was just going to throw out that quarterly dates that make sense would be January, April, July, and October. It's spread across the year, but it would be useful to correlate that with Aquino's reports as well. So I'd like us to clarify just the quarterly dates so that we have those as benchmarks for ourselves, and then set out our dates. Because I think if we have those in the calendar, that'll help us focus a lot more. Like, we know this is going to happen 4 times a year, and these are our summer dates for our particularly big thing in the summer. And we get those and we're serious about that on our calendars. I think that'll help clear up and focus us a lot.
Yeah, I just think that we need to come here, after studied this, and just note the dates that we want to do these action items. I think that's the first thing that we need to do, is really pinpoint, like you just suggested about the quarterly meetings, but other things we need to also include, like, for example, improve communications. That's not the one. Have bi-weekly meetings with the superintendent. So what are those dates that we're going to do that? When do they start and when do they end? I think we need to now get specific with that. So, and I think we probably need to come at our next meeting with prepared to recommend dates for the action items.
So I thought we actually already discussed that it was going to be quarterly while we were doing revisions, and you made the same suggestions of those months. So I thought that actually made it into the report, because when we were having these discussions, we said we would actually identify start and end dates for each of these topics. And then when we said that we would do quarterly, we did identify in the draft session the quarterly, so that it make it into the report.
I don't remember reading in there specifically January, April, July, and October. Maybe it's in there. I need to look at it again. Said quarterly. We might have just said quarterly.
No, I know we discussed it because, yeah, because there was some different quarterly months identified first, and then I think based off the school calendar, I think you made some adjustments to these dates. And we discussed it, and I thought we actually agreed to put it in there. But
so we should align it to Dr. Aquino's quarterly reports and have some conversation, and maybe Ms. Simis, you could give some suggestions about how to arrive at the best times for the quarterly dates. You think?
Do we know the exact dates that he is issuing his quarterly reports? Yeah. I know he's drafted one already, and it's
just about finished.
Yep.
Okay, so that's a follow-up, is to find out about his dates, and then maybe speak with him about aligning ours, and then actually put these in our calendar.
Yeah.
So.
Either we could do it, the board could do it, or you could do it, Linda, or collectively we could do it. But I do think we need to find out, and he's free to talk about it. Again, he talked to me about his first one the other day. So if we could find out when he's offering those reports, so we could make sure that our work is aligned with those dates. But again, our time frame here, Dr. Hallmark, is very tight. The board approved it. It takes us, many of these projects are to be finished by June of 2019, which is less than 6 months from now.
So if you look at, for example, page 12 is where it says, research how other boards operate to learn best practices. That's governance number 4. We've got a general date of February through June, but we may want to get more specific so that it becomes easier for us to work on specific things. So, that's the suggestion. When do we want to, that speaks to the timeline that we're referring to. When do we want to work on A and B, for example? Number A, for example, research how other boards operate to learn best practices. So, is those where we've got to now get more specific on the timeline. Okay. And I think that we probably should study this or come back prepared, willing to work on this from this dais, you know, in terms of dates, maybe, or a separate kind of meeting to put the dates to it?
Well, so that would be one of those work sessions where we look
Yep.
at the structure. And
Yep.
so we can all come, we can study this, come together, get dates from Aquino and others, and then meet and maybe put a work session together.
So I was going to say just a couple things that President White talked about. So we don't have the accountability section in front of us, but I actually recommended that we have an electronic system that outlines all of that stuff, but I don't have it in here to read it. But I also wanted to make mention that even though I did vote no, I definitely will be saying that if we have something in here that we cannot do because we have not negotiated in the contract, I'm definitely going to be saying that I voted no for that very reason. And I also wanted to add that even with putting these dates, I am not going to be carrying the weight of the full board, and so I would hope that as the president, Van, that you would divvy up some of these responsibilities to people so they can bring us a foundation that we can work from. I mean, that was one thing that I also suggested, and I know it didn't make it into this report, but I was willing to put myself out there for different things just so I can do the groundwork and bring it back to you all so we can have a foundation that we started with. So I'm going to put it out there again that hopefully we can do that, because I'm definitely not carrying the full weight of the board for all of these things. It's just too much.
No, and I think that's exactly my point. Collectively, no one should have to bear this alone, not even the board president. I think we all should bear it. But interestingly, I think that's what staff is for too. Most of us have jobs, so we can't develop we're not the wheels on the road if to carry us forward, but we have staff that can put the rubber to the road. Dr. Lee, when she comes back, Francine, when she's here now, can begin to look at that. But to your point, Commissioner Shepard, I do think it is my responsibility, or whoever is board president's responsibility, to sort of manage the work. But make no mistake about it, we all own this document. That was the only point I'm trying to make. But that doesn't mean we all have to do the work to make it happen. So I hear what you're saying. I understand it is part of my responsibility to make sure that some of this work is coordinated, and I will indeed do that. And to the extent that you all feel that you have a special place in helping some of this work take place, then certainly let me know that. But I want to be honest, though, while Francine is doing great work, I think our work will really start to begin to be activated when Sinead comes back. Because the reality is Francine is doing double time now. So 2 weeks is when she's coming back? Yep. I'm sorry, Dr. Hallmark.
So, anyone else have a comment? So I want to follow up. Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Shepard, for your comments. Maybe that could be another action item for all the board members. If there are certain sections that you would be interested in taking on or doing some homework or leading, and that would be the same for everybody else. Yes.
Dr. Aquino must be listening.
Yes,
Okay.
he's watching.
Hi.
Just texted me that the quarterly reports are February, April, July, and October.
Thank you, Aquino.
Okay.
And so why isn't Dr. Aquino here?
Good question.
I'm just saying that for if he's watching.
He must be writing the report.
He's writing the report.
So,
Hello, Dr. Aquino.
right. So that's two items that I'm hearing is that we'll get the timeline set, get those dates for the timeline, and then if every one of the commissioners could look through this report and look at if there are any particular sections they would like to take a lead on or to do some further research on, and we come back together, we can organize that.
The other thing I would add, too, I think the board president has a unique responsibility here, but remember now, we did not abandon our committee structure. We sort of put it, so Dr. Hallmark, not to pull you into this, but my thought is that Sinead would be working with you on a lot of this governance stuff, as you already are doing. Yeah. But when you look at this document, the first part of the governance and leadership, I imagine you'll find you and I having conversations. But to your last point, I think other board members, to Commissioner Shepard's point, other board members should look through this not only in terms of how they could help carry the load, but also what areas reflect the committee chairpersonship that you previously held, right? And I think if you find that entryway, then let Shanae or I or Liz know that you can be of some assistance. Again, I think this provides a perfect context and framework for us to do our work. So as you are looking to put on topics, as Vice President Elliott did today, look for topics that allow us to satisfy or get to the point where we are satisfying some of these action items. Again, we should be talking less and less about Dr. Aquino and his report, and I know he's listening, and I'm glad he's listening, and we should be talking about more and more about what we said we are going to do. We, the operative phrase being we, are going to do. And I know he's comfortable with me saying that because this thing cannot be built, our success, our continued success, cannot be built around him. It's got to be built around us. And by the way, in case anybody's unclear about this, we wrote this. He didn't. Right? And that's the way, by the way, I know he wants it to be. So when we are setting agenda items, look for how you can satisfy your former leadership as chair in things that are written here. All right?
Okay, so just to put some legs on it, how about I circle back or ask Francine to circle back to the board to get the areas that you're interested in researching or taking a lead on in, what, a week's time?
Seems fair.
Does that sound good? So action item. So everybody has their homework, and we'll circle back around in about a week's time, okay? And get that list.
All right.
I'm done.
You said? All right. Next item on the agenda is the audit committee report, specifically textbooks, and that conversation will be facilitated by Commissioner LeBron.
So they're actually two different topics.
Okay,
but
all right.
we didn't, Francine didn't know, because I was already on the agenda, we just added it under. Just want to clear that. So everyone has a copy of the audit report. We didn't meet, but there was, and so the next meeting is Tuesday, March 5th, 2019 at 5:30. And we'll send out an email reminder to the committee members beforehand. But some things came up around previous audit committees and some reports that the board did not finalize. So those reports are going to be sent out to everybody here to review. They need to be formally adopted and accepted, but I want to note that they've already been done. So we are just, for formality, the same way that we go back and review old minutes and approve it. That's all we're doing. But there was a few reports that were not officially passed by this board. So if folks have questions, they can ask questions, but we can't give feedback on work that's already been done. It's already been done. All we're doing is reviewing them. So I wanted to give you guys at least 2 weeks before the next board meeting to review those. I'm going to suggest that myself, Commissioner Davis, and Shepherd do not vote on them because we were not here during that time that work was done. So, but that is completely up to you guys if you want to vote in favor of it. I know that I won't be voting for that particular reason. So the work's already been done. Those reports were presented to you guys a while ago. They just never got formally adopted. So I just want to throw that out there. That's all that concludes that report. Textbooks. So last year, the Rotary Club had approached me about a program that they have where they take old textbooks from different school districts, and they do it with all the school districts in Monroe County. And they take old school books, textbooks that the district's no longer using. They ship those books out to third world countries, it's particularly to new schools in third world countries that are really like one shack type of schools to give them supplies. And they do this at their expense. They have a moving company, they pay for all the shipping and so forth. And they built the partnerships with educators who go out and build these schools. So apparently there was like 6 pallets of old math textbooks in the district sitting in the warehouse. So I have made an inquiry about that. That was last year. I received an old, outdated policy, and the problem with the policy is that the procedures and the structure when that policy was created is no longer there and is outdated. So it essentially got kind of stuck via email and never properly addressed beyond me getting a policy. So fast forward, they approached me again like, hey, whatever happened to this string of emails that we had going around these textbooks? So Dr. Lee's out, so I had contacted the auditor to look into it, and that's how we discovered that the policy is outdated to the procedures and that the board does not have a way to essentially decommission books that we're no longer using. And so some of the feedback that I heard back from our auditor was that also staff were not really comfortable just giving a donation, and that in the past, textbooks or books that the district was no longer used, we had a community event where we gave out textbooks to parents, and we also allowed teachers to ask for those books that we may not be using district-wide in case they wanted to use it as supplemental curriculum or supplemental educational materials in their classroom, which I understand. I just want to throw this out there. I get it, and I think we should have a policy or something in place to have a process to get rid of old textbooks. My problem is that these textbooks are years old. It's not even Common Core, so it's beyond anything we're using right now. I would not feel comfortable giving parents old, outdated educational materials that they would not even be able to use to supplement with their child because we're using Common Core. And so I want us to do two things as a board, and we don't need to decide tonight. I just wanted to start the conversation tonight with you guys, that we make a motion or a resolution to donate those books, and then it's an and start having the discussions around creating a policy and working around figuring out how do we make decisions on how to get rid of old textbooks. Yes, Carl.
May I suggest that we ask the district staff to identify these books, determine whether they are of any further educational use, bring a resolution to the board with respect to gifting these books as indicated by the Rotary folks. It'll cut through a lot of this because you're the board. I mean, if you want to make a gift, so long as it's something that we can do, the board can do it. And I just was chatting with the chief of staff, and we think that's something that we can take on. And Everton then indicated to me that we have another apparently existing relationship with the Rotary, through which we're doing this already. So maybe we can, as an administration, consolidate all this for the board, and we'll bring you something to adopt.
Yeah, if that's okay with the board. I wanted to have this discussion with them about how this all came to be and what we discovered. But so I appreciate that. So thank you to the staff to taking that on. And yeah, I would like us to have a policy on this stuff as well. And if we do it where we can check the materials maybe on a yearly basis, so that if they're old and we are ordering new, then we offer them to parents and teachers and community members to use within that year that we're still using. But to have 5, 6, 10 years old math, like that, I just don't think that that's going to be a benefit to our parents. I just want to throw that out there. So that was all on textbooks.
I just would, it would be nice if we could have a presentation from the Rotary Club about it.
Yep.
So if you can arrange that, or whoever.
I sure
to
can.
arrange something like that to happen. I think the only issue that I have is that over the years, we've had parents in the community who've said that our students don't get the textbooks. And so could those be textbooks that have been around for years and years that our students should have received?
They should have.
And did not get. And so now we're sending them somewhere else. We've just got to be very careful that, and I remember Dr. Vargas saying he went over to Wilson Commencement and there was a pallet of books, and no one thought it to be their job to distribute those books, and they just sat there. Now, he happened to go over there to see them, you know, so that's my only concern, is that we make sure that our students have the books that they need. That's been a criticism of this community for a very long time, years. And to the point where we got them, we haven't given them to our students, but now we're giving them to some other people, so.
So I just want to say that the books, again, are outdated materials. We teach Common Core now. We have other Uzarin and other programs in the district. So yeah, these books would have been valuable to our students 6-10 years ago. Today, they're not, unfortunately. And I want to say last year, and I won't mention what school, I did do a school visit last year where there was a pallet of books just sitting by the dock. And I had went back like a few weeks later and they were still sitting there. Just that these are the things. And I think that's part of us not having a clear starting and ending point in our textbook process in terms of distribution and who's responsible and owning that at the school level, that yes, the books shipped to my school, who's responsible to make sure that every teacher got the books and that from the teacher that students have the books. It's not clear to me that we actually have a process for that in place. But for these particular books that I'm talking about donating, these old math books, they're at least between 6 and 10 years old.
Yeah, I get it, but it's, you know, again, you know, to your point about the process that we need to have in place. However, you know, people see books in the school. You mean to tell me people, the school community can't get together and discuss those
we
books?
have to have those conversations too. I don't know why that is. I will say that some stuff that did come up was that back in the day there were textbook clerks or book clerks, and those positions were cut. And as a result, those jobs were, the responsibilities of the textbook clerks were divided among other unions.
Some stuff just don't make sense to me.
Yeah, so then it was like, well, that's technically not in my job description or part of my role. And so I think that's where the disconnect honestly, I think that's part of where that dysfunction started to happen, when those positions were cut, but their job responsibilities and duties were not thoroughly thought out as to who was going to then take ownership of those things. So I do think we need to figure out now a way to solve that.
Yeah,
Couple
things. No, that's all right. A couple things. I think that's a good idea with respect to those books that have been sitting around. They're of no use to anybody. I think Carl, though, makes a good point. We ought to have somebody come in, either give a presentation or at least report on where those books are, whether they're not usable anymore, and how we can distribute them to the Rotary, all right? But I think some other important points need to be made. You seem to believe, and I'm not in a position to disagree with you, that there is no process. I would like to know whether the administration believes that there is a process for books, right? Here, a presentation, not today, but as a follow-up to this topic, which I think is an important one, because we don't want another set of books sitting around like you just observed not too long ago at Wilson.
I didn't say what school. I didn't say what school.
Oh, well, whatever. Yeah, okay, I'm sorry. I thought you said Wilson, but so don't take offense, Wilson. But we don't want books sitting around in any school, and so we ought to have some clarity with respect to whether there actually is a process. And so there should be a follow-up to this conversation. And then the other thing is there should be follow-up in terms of a policy on whether we should, it sounds like we should, and under what circumstances we can give away books. So I would suggest 3 things in the follow-up. 1, an inventory of these books that you're talking about to make sure, and by the way, I think that's a wonderful idea. I mean, we should always emphasize our giving side when we can. And this is clearly an instance when we can. So I think that's a great idea. But we ought to know whether there's a process, right? And somebody ought to present to, it shouldn't be a long portion of the meeting. And then there should be a policy, yes.
No, I just want to say in terms of the presentation, I can have Vanessa come and do the presentation. She did the investigation. I had her look into and reach out to everybody and speak with them from all sides.
In terms of the process?
Yeah, well, yeah, that's how I discovered everything, because then she called me and said, hey, it's not as simple as you think it may be, and here's why. And that's how we discovered that there used to be textbook clerks, and from when those positions were cut, this was an unintended consequence, if, you know, mind you, of making a cut and then not figuring out who will own this textbook distribution. But it could be administration with Anissa, but I would like Anissa to also
Sure,
give
well, that makes
her
sense,
findings too.
but whenever we do an audit, it shouldn't just end with the audit. So if Anissa said that, you know, there's no process, it sort of fell apart, yada, 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 the administration should have said, okay, this is how we are going to, we agree with this, or we don't agree with this, and this is how we're going to fix it. Did that happen?
Yeah, so she was working with Carl actually around the policy, and they were going to look at some of the pieces that were discovered, figure out a draft policy to present to the board for us to then start. So yes, she did the investigation, and she talked with folks from all sides. So that's my understanding, Carl, that she was going to be working with you on drafting a policy for the board.
But here's the thing, and maybe it's semantics. This is not, I'm thinking the policy thing that I was thinking about was the circumstance under which we could and should donate books. This is procedural. This is not policy. I'm wondering, given Anissa's report, if it was broken, did they fix the procedure? This is not something where board says, okay, this is going to be the policy for books. We charge the administration with creating procedure to make sure our books are used in a timely way. So my question to Anissa and to you would be, when she gave them the audit, did they come back with a response with respect to not policy, but how they were going to fix the problems that she identified?
Well, the problem is that there's a policy, again, on the books that is outdated, and the procedures are no longer even valid because it still includes the textbooks clerks that were here, which no longer are here. I think that's what I'm saying. Like, and my understanding is that we create policies, they create the procedures based on those policies. However, they feel like they're going to get it done to meet the needs of that policy and carry it out. So I think we can have further conversation with Anissa about it, but she was going to start with Carl to draft the policy, and the policy needs to be updated. We no longer have textbook clerks. You know, there's no inventory that they were doing and distribution. So when I say policy, that has to be updated too, that policy with the textbook clerk. We don't have them. Those clerks no longer exist.
And by the way, I think this is an important conversation because we're trying to get some level of understanding. And again, no disrespect intended, I'm trying to understand. I don't see this as a policy issue. I see this as us having textbooks. And to your point, to your concern, which is a legitimate one and an important one, that if we get books in, we got to make sure they get to, and there's no policy statement necessary for that. They should be getting the books to our kids, and there should be a procedure for that. Because the policy would be, get books to our kids.
No, Van, no, but let me just say too, in the policy, there was a way and a plan to get rid of books. Right? So they would have these community events, like I said in the beginning, and that was part of the policy, that we would offer them to teachers, parents, community members first, and then actually in the policy is that we would try to resell if they were of any value first, and then there was but some of those procedures have stepped down because again, that fell under those staff members who are a title that we no longer hold. You understand what I'm saying?
I get it, and I think we're now at a point of understanding. You're talking about what happens to the books after they expire.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And you're right, there has to be a policy about that.
Yes.
What I was thinking we were talking about, because I agree with you on that, there has to be a policy that is lawful to give away these books. What I thought we'd shifted the conversation to is preventing the books from getting to that point of staleness in the first place. There has to be a procedure for that. So I think we're on the same page.
Yeah, right, yes.
Okay.
But I was talking initially on the policy of getting rid of the textbooks, but then we shifted the conversation a little bit because Vargas, you put that out. I mean, I was a witness to it. And I do still think that somehow those are connected, right? Like if their books are not being given out and then they're just sitting for years and then we don't know what happens and who's responsible. So I do think they're connected, but what Carl and Anissa will be working on is how do we get rid of, decommission the textbooks. That's what they were going to be working on because that policy was initially tied. But I think we need to look at that policy. I'll actually have Anissa email everybody that policy before the next 2 weeks so you guys can also take a look at it.
Great.
Thank you. That's it.
You all set? All right. Thank you, Commissioner LeBron. Again, I really like the idea that whenever we can, we return back to other communities that aren't as fortunate as I. So thank you, Carl, for the follow-up work that you and Anissa will do on that. So that moves us to that portion of our agenda where we consider resolutions. I move things around a bit. There's only one resolution that I want to attend to right now. I need a motion to discuss Resolution 641.
So moved.
Been moved by Commissioner Hallmark, seconded by Commissioner Powell. Are there any questions or comments regarding Resolution 641? There being no questions or comments, all those in favor of Resolution 641 say aye. Aye. Any opposition? All right, I need a motion to, now hear me out before you say, yeah, I'll make the motion. I need a motion to go into executive session to discuss a disciplinary matter related to a particular student and to discuss the employment history of a particular employee, and finally, to discuss collective bargaining negotiations. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Been moved by Commissioner Hallmark, seconded by Vice President Elliott. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Ladies and gentlemen, our next meeting is February 19th at 5:30. Our next business meeting, that's a special meeting. Our next business meeting is February 28th, 2019 at 6 o'clock. You can find out any additional information you might need by going to www.rcsdk12.org. And anybody interested in seeing us, if you're really that dedicated, after this meeting is over, you can see us adjourned downstairs on the second floor. Good night, everybody. Drive safely.